Welcome to Bua with me, your host, Kuhlekonke Ntuli. Now, on the second episode, we'll be interrogating a book titled Meditations from the Gutter, Short Stories, Essays, and Poems. Now, as promised, we have this infamous guest of ours, Molaodi Sekake, who's an author, an activist, and a revolutionary. Now, to kickstart this conversation, we will be engaging two video submissions made by you, our viewers. Now, before we get to the readings, please remember you have an opportunity to engage, debate, critique anything and everything that will be discussed on this show. Now, before we even do that, please make sure you share the page, like the page, tell your grandmother, auntie, sister, everybody to be watching this insert of Bua le Watu. Molaodi, welcome to the show.
Hello, Watu. Thanks for having me yet again. I appreciate the moment.
Thank you for joining us. Now, the first reading submission was made by
Ntuli here, and with me this afternoon I have a book titled Meditations from the Gutter, Short Stories, Essays, and Poems by one Molaodi Sekake. I will be reading a piece titled The Within and the Beyond. It appears on page 147 of the book. And it begins. The reality of the interconnectedness of our lives has always been underscored in various ways in our communities. You can stop birds from nesting on your hair, but you can't stop them from flying above your head, always observed elders in our communities. Yet the insights ingrained in the adage had always eluded us. We only came to realize later that it sought to underscore the interrelatedness of our realities as human beings in relation to one another and to that of the natural environment. So we lived in the comfort of our fantasies. Otherwise, we could have realized that there are realities that exist beyond our desires, imaginations, and wishes. And most importantly, we could have long reflected on them to better our life situations. We could have, for instance, realized that such realities seek no approval from us to manifest and reproduce themselves. We could have realized that it is realities outside our immediate powers and those within our powers that make up the complex me and you, the complex us, the complexity of our lives. We would thus realize that they constitute our everyday experiences and the encounters. To therefore ignore any aspect that constitutes such a necessary complexity of our life would be to deprive ourselves of the rich understanding of life, human and non-human, and to forsake our agency to the vagaries of the prevailing order. Upon realizing the interconnectedness of our life realities, and the need for our agency as human beings, it rang ever true that indeed berries do not ripen according to the wishes of the monkey, as a Sotho proverb roughly translated would say. We can dream of purple skies and blue soils, of wonderful lives, of secured futures, but if we do not prepare for such, our wishes and sentiments and preferences and aspirations would be as good as dead. We have thus come to acknowledge that there are realities that exist beyond our wishes, sentiments, and preferences. It is realities that demand us to understand their manifestations, their logic, and their implications on our lives in simple yet popular terms. We need to connect the dots that make up our entire realities in society. Nothing ever exists in isolation. Riding on the crest of its logics and fantasies, everything is, in a true sense, interconnected. The sooner we understand and acknowledge this, the better equipped we would be to mount a struggle against a system that constantly strips off our humanity and dignity. We must therefore understand the logic of the empire at our very doorsteps, in our bedrooms, in our anthems, marriage vows, work agreements, business deals, and study materials. It is the empire of particular tastes, preferences, paradigms, and sensibilities. That is the empire that has dug deep into our lives. It has knitted itself into our everyday realities, actions, and choices. The empire is thus here, there, and all over. It is one thing in many, and many things in one. It is a frontier, a fairy tale, a fact, a force, a feeling, a sensibility, an enclosure. It is the above and the below, the wayward and mannered. As such, it requires us to understand ourselves in relation to others, and to understand ourselves in relation to the environment we live in and relate with. We must understand the dominant system that oppresses and exploits and dehumanizes us, a multi-headed hydra. We therefore cannot afford to focus on cutting one head and believe to have defeated it. We need to cut off, thus root out, every element of its oppressive and exploitative reality. This requires that we tackle the multifaceted nature of its violent logic. We must refuse to be desensitized to articulation, to totality, and struggle of the opposites, and thus to realities that constitute our life's world. The constellation of dynamic and complex realities that make up our everyday lives. We must be aware of such power dynamics. And that, again, was a piece titled The Within and the Beyond, on page 147 of this book by Molaodi wa Sekake, Meditations from the Gutter, short stories, essays, and poems. Thank you.
Now, second reader will be reading a story titled Paradox of Memory.
I'm reading from page 150, and the title is called Paradox of Memory. There are animals that upon being chased by predators automatically forget that they were being chased immediately when they stop seeing the predators. This is the paradox of memory. To have memory is to be burdened by what one either has to maintain or refute, what one has to remember and relive. This requires strength, emotional and psychological. This is the strength to either tolerate such experiences and encounters or to challenge them. The animal with a very short, close to non-existent memory has no anxieties and frustrations other than what it experiences at the time of the encounter. It has no other way of living, no guideline other than its instincts. Yet the consciousness-bearing human being with memory has to contend or grapple with the burdensome and traumatic realities. However, traumatic realities are pregnant with possibilities of liberation. This is an unovercomable reality of human beings as long as they live. It is never pleasant to embody a memory, especially a burdensome or traumatizing one. Yet we do not choose what we encounter in this world. This world has, for instance, too many unpredictable, too many things we have little or no control over. We are not, for instance, responsible for our oppression, exploitation, and dehumanization. Yet we have the responsibility to free ourselves from such yokes. We can thus work out how we respond to previous encounters. This is largely informed by what we want to achieve. It can only be a reality of experiencing a shake-up out of our comfort zone, for instance, that can enable us to respond according to our desires and aspirations. But if our belief system is in one way or the other informed by dynamic realities of our lives and not dogma, we can always find ways and means to breathe some sense into any situation, to find our purpose and therefore take advantage of the possibilities for freedom. This is the dialectical dynamic of memory. That is, memory as the embodiment of the possibilities for repression and of subversion. The animal with a short memory has no memory of the encounter and therefore of the implications of the encounter. It cannot, for instance, account for any chase, for any conflict. If it were to be asked about any of its encounters, it would not recall such events. It merely survives on instinct. Its memory exists as far as there is an encounter and as far as a recollection of such an encounter is concerned. In the absence of the history of the encounter, Memory loses its memoryhood, it passes off as nothing. In the case of an animal with a short memory span, there is no history of conflict, of abuse, of confrontation, of contradictions, etc. It will not be a subject of modern psychology or psychoanalytical studies that require the possession of some capacity for remembering encounters, or historical or philosophical studies that trace the evolution of registered beliefs or patterns of existence or rational prose. Animals without any reflective capacities or memory are spared the necessity, if not the burden, of asking, why was I abused, taken advantage of, oppressed and exploited? Or what did I do to deserve this bad treatment from others? Human beings do not have that luxury. While such a reality spares the animal of the need to think too much of its conditions and surroundings and attendant conflicts, of historicizing its agonies and anguishes and the consequential cacophonies of its life world, human beings cannot afford to just live in the context of many things that make life unlivable. As said earlier, memory, therefore, is never merely a question of remembering to heal. It is also, and most importantly, about power. This power is exercised to privilege certain memories and to suppress, if not erase, others. The systematic wiping off of memories that can disrupt the status quo is nothing else but deadly psychological warfare against those whose memories are occupied and or colonized. Without critical imagination and memory as a weapon, we would enter the battlefield in pursuit of our humanity quite naked and vulnerable. Whatever numerical or physical strength would be pointless. This is a predisposition those who struggle for freedom cannot afford to ignore. Otherwise, they can neither summon the spiritual powers for the ensuing battle, nor attain a single-minded sense of purpose. They would become the dispirited subjects of the prevailing order, sheepishly imbibing its value system. This is a tendency that has to be seriously understood if victories towards freedom are to be registered.
Now remember, you also have an opportunity to make your video submissions to the details on the screen. Molaodi, that was a heavy loaded number. It's heavy loaded stories. More than anything, I feel like I need to ask you this, and this is something that I've always had to ask when we're engaging in protest actions, activism. Do I have to tell my story? I feel like we're such a traumatized society that the second a person tells their story, a label is stuck onto their face, a victim, of traumatized individual. Now, what is the value of one telling their story and even remembering their story?
Yeah, thanks Watu, and thanks for the wonderful question. I mean, it's true. We are not offered an equal opportunity to tell our stories. Some stories are valued, some stories are not valued. I would give a practical example. When specifically black women, take up issues as a result of being violated, they are normally said to be angry, they are normally said to be insane, and generally in an anti-black racist world, when black people say no to oppression, no to dehumanization, no to exploitation, no to disenfranchisement, they are labeled as irrational, unthinking savages. So it is true. But I always maintain that we need to tell our stories against all odds. But then we need to shift who we tell our stories to. We cannot tell our stories to the oppressor who, sorry for my French, does not give a damn about our conditions, does not give a damn about our aspirations. We need to tell our stories to ourselves so that we do not lose hope in ourselves, so that we do not give up on life, so that we make our life meaningful, So, and also taking from the videos that were read out, from people, from readers. The story of the within and beyond, what it actually seeks to underscore is that we live in a society in which we are faced with complex realities. in a sense. So there are internal realities that we need to take into consideration in pursuit of our freedom, but there are also external realities that have the potential to hinder this pursuit of freedom. So that is the essence of the within and the beyond. So there is power within us to change our social, economic and cultural lot, but also we need to be aware of the external realities which could be overwhelming and therefore like make it impossible for us to attain our freedom.
Do you not feel, Molaodi, that sometimes it's not that we have forgotten, it's not that we haven't cared, but it's the sense that my hope looks like it might just be realized today and not just tomorrow. And so I'll neglect my community because I've studied, because I have an education. I'm sorry, but capitalism looks far more, attractive to me and more realistic than me staying in poverty because I'm not going to oppress the next person as a manager in a company.
Yeah, of course, and that is why the idea is that we need to understand both the internal and the external realities in pursuit of our freedom. One of the external realities that we need to take into consideration is that in pursuit of our freedom, there are always going to be forces that tell us otherwise. For example, that you can't work with your people from your community, that you can't work in solidarity, that you can't have collective work. So you have to be an individual who has to navigate this murky world towards some success, which is very weird in a sense, because the way we grew up to be successful is that we live as social beings. We are never alone. We are not individuals in an island. You get a point? So what you're saying is very important. Those are the external forces that we need to militate against in order to attain freedom. But the other thing which I want to emphasize is that to reread what we have already gotten from the videos is that we must therefore understand the logic of the empire at our very doorsteps, in our bedrooms, in our anthems, in our marriage vows, in our work agreements, business deals, and study materials. It is the empire of particular tastes, preference, paradigms, and sensibilities. This is the empire that has dug deep into our lives. So what basically it says is that the consideration of the internal and external factors is the complexity of our life. So in order to master this complexity, to understand it, to have a clarity of thought, we need not isolate things. One thing is at one corner, the other one is at another corner. You get the point? We need to bring these things together so that we have a comprehensive perspective of what we are dealing with. And this is what the essay seeks to do. And also by extension, if I may say, before you come in, that of the paradox of hope is simply that, we grew up being told, in Zulu, itambal bulali, So indeed, hope gives us this energy, this imagination to go ahead, to do things, to see the future, to imagine ourselves somewhere at some point. You get the point? But also, what this story seeks to underscore is that the very hope that is used or that we can use to map our future can be used in a very dangerous manner, where we are told to fold our arms and hope for the better, while we are actually being called upon to undermine our agency to change our lot. So there's a whole host of other things that we need to take into consideration, and that is why we need to understand good hope and a bad hope. Bad hope is that which you are told to wait for some Messiah who is going to deliver freedom to you, while the status quo continues to mess up our lives.
Okay, Molaodi, I genuinely hear you. But we're now speaking to viewers who are saying, Molaodi, I am 20 or 30 years old, 50, whatever. This is my lived reality. Now, what you're talking about sounds like socialism, and listen up, I don't have time to waste. Now, in the system that we are living in, you automatically have to survive within the capitalist system, meaning that automatically by engaging in a lot of means of production, or for you to attain the things that you want, the car that you want, the house that you want, usually you become an oppressor to some degree. You have to utilize paper, a tree is chopped down, you're living in a gated community. So for you to engage in this hope that must be attained, you automatically have to blind yourself from the realities that across the road in a township where people are actually very poor. So I need you to contextualize this hope within today's context. There's capitalism, you sound like you talk about socialism. How do we become hopeful but at the same time conscious and actually engage in new reality and saying, dude, I'm sorry, but I know that we talk about it's not just about food. We need to exist within the ecosystem. But you sound like you talk about socialism. And is it attainable right now?
Okay, now I'm actually describing the very system we live under. Look, it's not unusual for human beings to lose hope.
Okay.
And for the status quo to make people lose hope in themselves. Meaning to not realize their agency. I mean, during the era of feudalism, there was a strong belief that feudalism is eternal, it's unchanging. Kings will rule forever. Where are we now? We have no kings, we have no empires, we have no kingdoms, in a sense.
Okay.
So it's every society undergoes a phase where there are people who are so pessimistic and there are people who are hopeful. So what we are trying to say is that in the absence of immediate resources that could sustain our lives, we need to take into consideration the fact that our hope has to bear something worthwhile for us. And that is why I'm saying we must distinguish between bad and good hope. Hope where we are told to fold our arms and some manna from heaven will fall. No, it's never going to be the case. So that is why we need to unravel the status quo. That is why we need to understand these complex realities of our lives, so that whatever hope we embody becomes an emancipatory hope, not a hope of despondency.
I hear you, Molaodi. Let's talk about the interconnectedness of our society. Now this means that a man and a woman and a child and even other genders and races have to coexist. Now, how does the book bring into context how we should be relating with other? Because to be quite honest, when I see the gutter, I see a black face. So how would we then not isolate ourselves as the gutted community, but actually seek to exist with other races? How can we actually attain our hope and actually heal while existing with white people? What is our sense of relationship with other races who are in power right now?
In order for coexistence to be a reality and to be an authentic reality for that matter, there has to be an ethical form of relationship. But there can't be an ethical relationship when some people are considered less human by other people. So we can't force ourselves to a white society, to an anti-black racist society, simply because we want to coexist. We don't want to coexist for the sake of coexisting. We want to coexist so that our lives and everybody's life is affirmed. You get a point?
Okay.
So we can't force ourselves to a society that refuses us. So that is what we are talking about. You know, so the interrelatedness of our reality is that the system is complex in a sense. So it doesn't come to you in a direct way or in a one-dimensional way. I am getting you on one aspect, tomorrow I will get you another aspect. In a day, to a single individual, so many things happen. And those so many things underscore the complexity of our life. That is why we need to connect the dots, so to speak, the usual speak, when we deal with our realities, and most importantly, when we pursue our freedom. Because we can't, there is a story of a multi-headed hydra, that animal that grows so many heads, So we are dealing with a multi-headed hydra. If you want to kill it, you don't kill one head, you kill the other head that has the potential to produce other heads. So that is what we mean by interconnectedness. of our social realities in order for us to attain our freedom.
Do you not think that automatically, you said in the book, you make inferences that even our desires are informed by the colonial empires, the things that we aspire to, our taste in life, finer things in life. We all want nice things.
Soft life.
We all want those things.
But for the few.
And the reality is that even the attainment of these things, the production of those things, is inherently for the few. So how do we unlearn wanting things that have been intentionally put out there to actually create segregation amongst communities and ultimately oppression? Because it's only for the few. To attain it, you need to have undergone a certain system of you thinking you're inferior, wanting gated communities. So we aspire for all of these things. Automatically, you attribute blackness with crime, and so we run away from the data. How do we unlearn this and start re-envisioning the data as something admirable?
Of course, and that is why we must do a proper work of imagination and reimagination. Because the last episode, the first episode we had, we spoke about assumptions that are made, which anchor particular power relations. So again, we need to challenge some moral and philosophical assumptions about what are needs, what are wants, what are desires, what is good for human beings. So we need to get rid of a moral philosophical framework that prioritizes individuals over collective, that prioritizes interests and needs that harm others and salvage an individual. So we need to produce these radical imaginations that rethink life in its entirety. And that rethinking of life is about preference, it's about tastes, it's about attitudes, it's about an entire value system of what life is. What do we consider valuable? Do we consider something valuable simply because an individual or a tiny minority of individual benefits at the expense of others? So much as it's a political and ideological struggle, it is also a moral philosophical struggle as far as redefining what morality is, what ethics is, the political economy of needs. You get a point?
I get you. Now, this is where I'm coming from. Some people don't just move away from the gutter because they hate blackness or they hate the township or whatever it might be. It is because they have been traumatized by the lived experiences within the gutter. Now, how do we then start differentiating between unlearning certain things and saying, I choose to be the change in my community? At the same time, how do we choose to forget? Because some people have not forgotten. We think they forgot. But the reality is that my parent was killed in the gutter. And so the gutter is me reliving this pain. It's dramatic. At the same time, how do we heal while we are still in the gutter? And so all of those realities are things that people are living through and saying, I choose to forget. But maybe me hating the gutter, moving out of the gutter is my way of healing.
Solution: build an alternative ethic of being in this world. Because the dominant ethic is that of competition, is that of jealousy, is that of narcissism. We get a point. What we need, we somewhere in the book, we have said, in the world in which we're supposed to live as slaves, to exhibit forms of love, it's a criminal act. So we must do that which the system does not want us to do. We must replace the hatred that the system fosters to us as a community with love amongst ourselves. We must replace the logic of violence with the logic of compassion. We must replace the logic of competition and distrust with the logic of mutual distrust. So the only way we can overcome the system, the only way we can become our true selves, is to build an alternative way of being in this world. And part of building that alternative way of being in this world is to build a radically different moral and ethical framework, and therefore a society based on love, compassion, mutual trust, care.
So how do we treat people? For example, Someone else might experience the gutter more violently within a domestic space. Some might see the government, councillors, as the people who are perpetuating the violence. And these are black brothers and sisters. Omunye might say it's actually capitalism. It's multinationals, and you attribute it at various levels. Now, for me, I'd want to hear from you. How do we treat our perpetrators, at the same time recognizing that they are also gutted? Sometimes their response is from a place of pain. They only know violence. Some people say, no, it's not in a jail. And some say, no, let's correct them. Correctional facilities, we're not jailing them. People come back into our communities, but we see them as people who don't deserve to breathe anymore, forgetting that the gutter has produced crime because of the higher system. You are looking at your local. So how do we treat our perpetrators within the corrected system? This utopia that we're talking about, the gutter that we all aspire to live in.
We don't aspire to live in a gutter. In fact, what we want to emphasize is that we hate the gutter because the gutter is violent. So ours is not to humanize the gutter, because it is inherently, as you said earlier on, it is inherently the operative word violent. So what we can do, and one could even refer to some works of black scholars, bell hooks, to say, look, love is a powerful tool to reimagine our communities, to reimagine our lives. You get a point? But most importantly, when it comes to us in the gutter antagonizing each other for no reason, black people also have to take accountability. Any talk of freedom without accountability is as good as dead. So if you want freedom and you get this freedom, what responsibilities do you have in its pursuit, and when you have gotten it, to preserve life? So two things, freedom and responsibility. So we must take responsibility that if we want a truly free society, we do not take advantage of the very people who are oppressed, who have nowhere to go. And specifically, black men have to take responsibility of the very violence they met against the black women. And that is the only way we can build a proper community. But if the gutter itself is divided, the gutter that has to unite in order to attain its freedom, then we are not going to go anywhere. In fact, it is going to aid the status quo, and the entire black community will remain fragmented. So what I'm trying to say is that a black person can go out of a township to some place called a suburb, but they are not free, and they will never be free, because they have what in the book we refer to as an ontological mark of Cain. So wherever you go, you are cursed. Even before you commit anything, any crime, by virtue of your existence. Let me make a practical example of a rich, African American, Oprah Winfrey. I think 4 or 5 years back, she went to, a Swiss shop, to buy a handbag. When she got in, while still checking, the available handbags, then the store, the person who was selling, said to her, she is not allowed to buy here. She cannot afford it. We know who Oprah Winfrey is. So and it became there was a huge uproar around that, because by the way, Oprah Winfrey could have afforded that bag.
Shop,
but as a result of her being black, there were certain assumptions that this one is playing here, she's never gonna afford it. So what I'm trying to say is that wherever you go, no matter how much money you can have as a black person, you walk with this ontological curse. It is on you, it is within you, within this anti-black racist world. So you can move out of Khayelitsha, you can move out of Nduzuma, you can move out of Claremont, Mdantsane, Masphumelele, any other township, Tembisa, Vosloorus. Unless we undermine, unless we overthrow an anti-black racist, capitalist, imperialist order, wherever we go, we will always be ontological infidels.
In the book, Molaodi, you say it is never pleasant to embody a memory, especially a burdensome and traumatizing one. Yet we do not choose what we encounter in this world. Now, I'm an optimist by nature. How does a person right now, and I get you're saying that we must remember our traumas so that when we act from a place of fighting the system, which is what I'm gathering. But how does a young person right now choose between remembering the pain and actually emancipating themselves? Because each and every day, it's like you say, remember the person who raped you so that you never forget that this society is dirty. I just want to put it in that way. I know it's a bit, it's an emotional thing, but every time, I speak to some of my mentees, they say that whenever people protest against gender-based violence, I'm reminded of that night. It's a traumatizing experience to relive, but does that automatically burden me to becoming an activist, to becoming constantly conscious and carrying this weight that I've been a victim, therefore I need to be active against the system?
Well, thank you very much. What we need to, and that is why I said we must build alternative ways of seeing the world in order to build an alternative society. And also, we as the oppressed, unity is very important in a sense, because when we are united, the trauma of oppression, of course, it doesn't go away, but its implications become less. You get a point? When we are united and realize our collective experiences as the oppressed, that is why I said we must build a world built on the ethics of love and compassion and mutual trust, so that we are able to navigate through this. The other thing which is important to emphasize is that memory is important in pursuit of our liberation. The essay talks about an animal that has no memory, like a cockroach or a fly. You know how those insects behave. We are you chase them away, and they come back because they forget that they were at a place where they were nearly killed. That's the danger of lack of memory. But also, in as much as to embody a memory is very traumatic, but it's important in our pursuit of liberation because we know who hurt us, we know who violated us, and who continues to violate us. We know who does not have the best our interest at heart. You get a point? So, in as much as memory is burdensome, in a sense that it reminds you of traumatic encounters, but it is also important to say, I don't like you because you are hell-bent on violating me. I like you because you show that I am also a human being. So that is the importance of memory, So that is why the essay is titled The Paradox of Memory, in a sense that while it is traumatic, but we cannot give away memory, we cannot abandon the importance of memory in pursuit of our liberation, because we need to know who, if we lack memory, we are going to argue and debate ceaselessly over who colonized us. Who know who colonized us? If we don't have memory, we are going to debate and ask ourselves ceaseless questions. Who is oppressing us? Who is underpaying us?
In fact, that's exactly where we are as a country right now. The conversation has shifted. In the book, you mentioned that berries don't ripen just because we want them to, and when we want them
according to the wishes of the monkeys.
Yes. Yeah. And so let's look at post-1994. Apparently, I don't believe in post-apartheid South Africa, but let's just, entertain that idea. Where are we right now in terms of the unity of this country? I don't want to talk about the unity of black people. I want to talk about the unity of this country, because when we're transforming something, we're not transforming just black people, but it's a system that we exist in each and every day. Where are we post-1994, and where are we in our unity?
Things have changed to remain the same. That is the long and short answer I can give you. Perhaps in some other episodes we will deal with that, because we have what we call a Stockholm syndrome, which explains and therefore which will answer your question as to where we are now as South Africa, and it's a very dangerous yet a syndrome that reigns supreme as we speak. But I guess at some point we'll talk about it and thoroughly get into the debate of where we are and how we can get ourselves over. Of course, someone would argue and say the entire republic is the gutter for black people, for women, black women in particular, you know, for the LGBTIQ community, you know.
Now, with all that said, Molaodi, how do people heal? In the interim, while we are still being oppressed, how do we heal? I heard you speaking about anger. I hear how you write about don't lose your sense of consciousness. In fact, this is just me because I'm allowed to. I believe that the excessive investment in Amabesh, the excessive investment in festivals as a country is what helps us try and erase the violence that we experience every day. If you work in a firm and that violates you, somehow when you leave work and you go and drink a bottle of beer, you're a bit drunk, you forget, you laugh, you immerse yourself in the joys of just those 2 hours post work. How do we not forget but at the same time heal ourselves from what we are experiencing as a nation? Yes, there's still capitalism, but you're telling us to be angry, you're telling us to be sober enough so that we are angry enough to engage in the war that is yet to happen.
Yeah, just to quickly answer your question. In the book on page 16, I think the fourth paragraph, it reads as follows. When I say I can't take it anymore, I'm told to look on the brighter side of life and stop being a damn pessimist. But how is that possible when life here is an all-round mare's body? Everywhere I look is utter anguish. It is the perpetual grinding of teeth. I see bodies wrinkled not by old age but by poverty. I see dreams going up in smoke, bent, squandered by unemployment. And this is where it gets to your question. I see young people relying on antidepressants to deal with harsh implications of exploitative, traumatic, anti-black, racist, capitalist workplaces. I live where suicide, paradoxically speaking, has become a new way of life for those who can no longer take it. The dark cloud of despair stubbornly reigns supreme. So, as it continues, you know, when people continue reading, they will realize that at some point we are asking a question. Is relying, for example, on antidepressants a solution? And we are saying no. That is why we are saying we must enter a political battle. But not only a political battle, we must enter a moral and ethical battle, so that the political struggle is based on a particular moral and ethical imagination of a society we want. And that is why I will always emphasize that building an alternative society based on love, compassion, mutual trust and respect and tolerance, as people who are colonized, as people who are enslaved, as people who are dehumanized, as people who are exploited, is the only solution. We cannot bask in the glory of the dominant moral and ethical system and think we are going to be free. We need to build an alternative. Otherwise, we will continue banging our damn heads against the wall.
If we were to look at hope, are we willing to be the frontline soldiers of this fight that we're saying we are up against? Are we willing to be the sacrifice? You've written a book, but are we willing to die as a country? Are we ready for this book and its implications?
I'm not sure whether we're willing, but the book says we should be willing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, to draw back and maybe just to try and conclude, what is a genuine hope when you're looking at us uniting as a nation? What does a genuine hope look like to you? I see the book,
okay,
but maybe practicalize an image of saying, if I love my neighbor, is it greeting them? Is it us going and fighting together? What does
genuine hope is when young people who are talented are given space to express their talents. Genuine hope is when people who have, expertise in certain fields are given space to do so. Genuine hope is when people who are passionate about soccer, about literature, about art are allowed to do so. Hope that is bad is when people are told to turn away from what they are passionate about and, for example, focus on a wage labor system where people wake up in the morning, come back late, they are paid wages, they don't have time for themselves. What in your Marxist textbooks is called alienation. So they don't have time for themselves, they don't have time for their loved ones, they don't have time for the community. So they lose what is normally called their species being. You know, so a hope based on human beings freely expressing themselves, on human beings being able to pursue their dreams without the interference of the power structure that bans their passion, that violates their humanity, that forces them to do that which would eventually not add value to their lives. It's actually a bad hope. And we can't pursue a political struggle on the basis of a bad hope.
Do you think that consciousness is innately, you know, there's no one who's not conscious because of your experience, you know that something is bad? Because sometimes people are saying, but I didn't know. What is capitalism? What is socialism? Do you think that our lived experience automatically, as people, whether you've been traumatized or whatever it is, do you think it automatically means that Molaodi, you are conscious of the wrongs that you see every day?
It really doesn't. I think it's a very good question. It really doesn't. There is no direct connection between suffering and consciousness. There is no direct connection. And there is no direct connection between suffering and action that is meant to overcome that suffering. There is no. So that is why we are, you know, one has worked on this text to explain in a very relatable manner, to say, look, you're suffering. You know the essay we read, and the one that was, I think, was read by Mukwana, the within and the beyond.
Yes.
Is that the interconnectedness of our realities should say, or should achieve a purpose where people realize that, look, my suffering is connected to 1, 2, and 3, and 4. Because now people are suffering. Some people are saying, no, God is angry. There's no such. There are certain social, political, and economic realities that are responsible for that suffering. And this work is part of understanding the nature of that suffering, but most importantly, to garner the strength and the stamina to overcome that suffering by making a connection between our suffering every day and the important or the necessity to act so that we end that suffering. So suffering, consciousness building, and political action to overcome that which makes us not to be true human beings.
Molaodi, in the story in the poem Paradox of Hope, you write, to believe politicians when they say your lives will change if you vote for me, amidst a record of failures and betrayals. This is in the context of the abuse of hope. Hope is an amazing thing because it gives us reason to wake up the next morning when someone is thinking about taking their lives. They think about, but what if? What if my next is tomorrow? Now, in this context, can a person actually properly differentiate between when their hope is abused or when it's actually genuine hope? Everyone hopes that South Africa will change, especially for their betterment. It's no longer the betterment of all. At this point, when someone is broken, they're saying, I've seen people's lives change, but what about for me? How do we actually start, differentiating as a broken community the abuse of hope? Young people are not voting anymore. At the same time, we're an ecosystem. When you don't vote, what are you actually saying? Have you lost hope completely? How does the system change when you're not engaging? So please engage me on that part.
We must bring back hope through genuine, radical politics and imaginations, because people might have lost hope as a result of a politics that is not responsive, inclusive, and therefore emancipatory. The other thing is that, bad hope, we can only undermine bad hope when we have political consciousness. When we are aware to say, look, here the political or the neo-colonial and neoliberal elite is playing hide and seek with us. It's when you are politically conscious. Because when you are politically conscious, some will come with a bad offer to trick you, to say, no, vote for me, There is a common saying that politicians promise to build a bridge where there's no river. So if you are politically conscious, you will say, no, but how are you going to build a bridge because there's no river here? So if you are not politically clear, and being politically clear does not mean some super way of thinking, super ideologies. No, it means the critical awareness of the environment you exist within, and the ability to reject and take certain offers from whoever offers them. That's it. So if we cultivate critical, radical, counter-hegemonic imaginations amongst young people, they will be able to say, no, I would say they will be able to say, or you guys are taking us for a ride, because you are aware of the environment you exist within, its possibilities and constraints, but also you are aware of the integrity of the person who makes the offer. If we were to make any like a biblical analogy, if some evil spirit or Satan would come and like it happens in the Bible when Satan takes Jesus to a higher point and said, if you pray me, if you kneel before me, I will give all these things. You get the point? So when you are politically clear, when you are ideologically clear, you are able to interrogate the nature and the character of the offer. And this would apply to politicians, to young people. When they come to us as young people, you interrogate the nature, the character, meaning the possibility of the offer. Is it genuine or they just want elections? And
a lot of young people, Molaodi, are joining the political system right now and saying, I want to be a comrade, I want to be an activist. Do you think that at this point we can change the system from within?
We must try to change. We cannot take away the fact that we live within a capitalist system, and whatever we do, we must do it within. We must start within. You get the point? That is why I always say, within this system, let's build a counter tradition, meaning a tradition that counters the logic of the system. Within this system, let's do that which the system does not want us to do, because it knows or it realizes that once we do that, it is going to lose its capacity to control us. It is going to lose its capacity to treat us like sheep, like heads of cattle. Then it tells us to go that side, we sheepishly go. It tells us to behave in a particular manner. So within the very system, and this is where the possibility for human beings to be free. And lastly and most importantly, no system of oppression throughout the history of humanity has ever been successful in completely suppressing the hope of human beings. Even in the midst of oppression, and we have emphasized that somewhere in the beginning of the book, you cannot completely destroy hope in human beings. There will always be a glimmer of hope. So by being political and ideologically clear, we nurture that hope so that it does not die away. Because once it dies away, hope, optimism about life, and life in its entirety loses value. And we will forever live as the enslaved. We will forever live as people who sheepishly follow whoever tells us that we must follow them. Because
there's no alternative voice. Yeah. Thank you so much, Molaodi. That has been a mouthful, but very conscious, I guess. Very informative. Thank you for coming onto the show. We are looking forward to you coming back again to join us in our next episode. You are all encouraged to comment, engage some of the questions, and even post questions to Molaodi that we can read out to all of you in our next episode, where we interrogate the book Meditations from the Gutter, short stories, essays, and poems. Now, to read us out, we've been interrogating a poem that has not been read out. It is titled Paradox of Hope, and the person who will be reading us out is none other than Umawethu Kosana.
So I'm reading from page 186, and the title of the piece is called The Paradox of Hope. The book is called Meditations from the Gutter, and the piece goes as follows. Hope gives us the reason to live, to see another day, to fight, to love, to care, to be considerate, to have ambitions, to expect, to commit, to promise, to invest, to exchange things, to start something new, to have a vision, to have a concept of the future. It keeps us alive even after so many of our ambitions and expectations and wishes have burned beyond oblivion in its very name. It picks us up every time we fall. It wipes our tears to despair. It heals our wounds from being violated so many times. It gives us the ability to imagine ourselves beyond the gutter, or perhaps to make sense of life in the very gutter. It shows us life and its possibilities beyond grief and the grave, and so we are always told, Ithemba libulali. Yet the very same hope can be used to postpone our future, to believe in futures that may never come, to pledge our loyalty to inconsequential discussion and debates under the pretext that we are going somewhere, to believe politicians when they say, your lives will change if you vote for me, amidst the record of failures and betrayal, to believe motivational speakers and preachers when they say your time is coming, even when we see that they have turned motivation into a profitable industry. Hope makes us have faith in tomorrow that may come with angry clouds, torrential rains, and buffeting winds of despair. Hope can deactivate the potential explosion of dangerous thought that forces its way into the future in the belief that everything will come out of its own predetermined time, and thereby makes itself something more dangerous when the armies of the world and their deadliest weapons, when it comes to crushing the revolution of the poor, by the poor, for the poor. This is while we are made to fold our arms and hope, yes, just hope, that things will fall into place in the never too far future. Hope has produced false prophets who erase the necessary uncertainties and contingencies of reality and sell us cheap remedies for existential dilemmas. Prophets who consistently churn out far-fetched eschatologies to falsely console our quest for success and well-being in the now, who conveniently replace history and experience with hallucinations and false iconographies.
Now, don't forget to like, subscribe, join the page, and invite all your friends to be a part of this community where we engage radical revolutionary literature. And that's it from me, your host, Kuhlekonke, Ntuli. Join us again in our next episode of Bua le Watu.